Hi, I'm Owen, the host of the Australian Finance Podcast. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betashares, one of the leading providers of ETFs here in Australia. Serving thousands of financial advisors and over 1 million investors, Betashares manages tens of billions of dollars on behalf of investors right across the country. I'm proud to partner with Betashares on the Australian Finance Podcast, Australia's premier financial podcast, because there is great alignment in the long-term philosophy shared by both businesses. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Australian Finance Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information. Gemma Mitchell, question for you. Do you have a budget?
Yes.
You do?
Of course. I've got budgets on budgets. I've got spreadsheets that annualize it monthly.
Really?
Yes, I'm a spreadsheet kind of person.
Well, I guess a qualified financial advisor, that would make sense. This is episode 3 of our summer series. We've covered goals and behavior/mindset already. So this is all about budgeting, and we're going to talk about how you do it, talk about the different strategies that people use. At the end of the episode, of course, we will have a different, approach for different people that you can take one of the approaches and see if it works for you. We're going to talk about why budgeting is important and just talk generally about maybe some of the places that people go astray, how they go wrong, and then where they go really right. My budget has definitely evolved over the years, Gem. Now, I feel like I'm a bit of an anomaly in that regard, that I have changed it probably more than the budget's changed. The way I do it, the way I record things. So I'll share some of that. But let's talk about this idea of budget. There are many different books on it. Talk to us, what is it and why is it important?
So budget, the word budget gets a really bad rap, but a budget essentially is a plan for your money. It is telling your money where to go rather than wondering where it went. So whatever you want to call it, if the word budget makes you cringe, just replace it with something else. Whatever you want to call it, it's literally a plan for your money. And I think that's the most important thing, because budget, when people hear the word budget, a lot of the time they associate that with restriction. And it's not about that. It's about making sure that you're spending on things that you want to be spending on, that add value to your life, not wondering where your money's going and not actually then having enough resources to fund the stuff that really matters. It's literally just a plan of where stuff's going.
So where you want your money to go. Mm-hmm. I love that idea.
Yeah.
So where do I prioritize this, that, or the other?
Yeah, exactly. And so money touches every aspect about life. It's our health, it's our work, getting to and from, it's our housing, food. Money is a huge impact. So of course we need to know where that's going and what resources we have, what money we have coming in needs to actually fit for our lifestyle. So how we do that is by having a good idea of where our money is actually going. And to do that, you need a budget, whatever budget style that is for you. And the great thing about finance is it's not one size fits all. There are so many different ways to do things. So what works for me will not work for the next person. If somebody picked up my spreadsheet budget, they would just be like, there was no way that I would make anybody budget like I do. But as you were saying, it's it evolves. So it never used to be like that. It's just, it evolves with me and my expenses and how I like to do things. And so should however you set up yours.
It's interesting you say that. I get a bit of I don't know, it's not anxiety. I get a bit overwhelmed when I get any spreadsheet from anyone else, because I'm just trying to figure it out. As a spreadsheet person myself,
yes,
I'm often like, why is that there?
Yes.
What is this?
Because it makes sense to you. Even so, you've got some pretty hectic spreadsheets that you've shown me, and you're just like, da-da-da, and this is this, and I'm just like, whoa.
Yeah.
So it's because it's evolved with you, and it probably started much simpler. But yeah, finance is personal. So you just find what works for you, and if you've tried something and it hasn't worked, just keep tweaking it. It doesn't have to be a whole overhaul for you to go from zero to how I manage my money. You do the baby steps that evolve with you, that feel right at the time. And then when you learn something else, you might, apply that.
Yeah, I like that. So as with the previous episodes in this series, I've handed a couple of things over to you and just be like, you tell us everything that we should know about budgeting. I've got quite a few of my own, but I'm curious to see how you go about this. In your notes here, you've said something which I didn't actually realize, but I'm probably doing. Budgeting, you've got, say, 10 minutes. What could you tell all of us in 10 minutes about budgeting that you've mastered, or not even mastered, just figured out over the last decade plus?
Okay. Definitely haven't mastered it. It's a work in progress.
Work in progress.
Yes, absolutely. I think the biggest thing that you need to understand is overcoming your thought pattern around it, that it's restrictive. You need to see it as a tool and as freedom, right? As it allowing you room to do the things. It's a tool to help you. So you need to think of it like that. Absolutely. And that is going to be that shift alone is going to really, really help. But understanding the concept of value aligned spending. So when you're doing a budget, you need to make sure that there's things in your budget that actually reflect your values. There's a saying, or, like if you went through somebody's bank statement, you could tell them where they, where their values lie, right? But I think a lot of the time people would be spending on things that aren't adding value. They're just going through the motions, and, maybe travel or family experiences or quality time are things that they value, but then they've got all of the Netflix subscriptions and all of these different things that don't actually reflect those values. And it's okay to have things like that, but you want to be really intentional with where your money's going. So a budget is a great opportunity for you to just have a little bit of a stock take and question, do I need that? Yep, I want it. It adds value to my life. I enjoy it. Cool, then it can stay. But it's just about questioning and challenging. Just because we've always done something doesn't mean we need to do it. And that applies with our spending. I might actually just ask everyone, I would be fascinated to do this as an exercise because you get to do it a lot. But if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, then Gemma, let's put you to the test. If you want to send us just a snippet of your bank statement, you can send it in an email form, anonymize it. Don't give us your full info. But if you want to send it, and then in the last episode, which is episode 11, which is the Q&A and general catch-up type episode, I want to take a run at this. I want to give us both a bank statement and be like, what do we think the values are, and see how we go. Yeah. Would you be keen for that? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So if you're willing to be the guinea pig in this very scientific test, I'm sure, send us a spreadsheet or something, just anonymize us, take all the key stuff. We're not going to share it publicly, but we're going to have a look at it. We'll have a look and see what we both come up with. And you can send it to service, that's SERVICE, service at rask.com.au, and just say budget in the subject line. I'll be fascinated. It'd be interesting to do it with 2 case studies. So one of the person that doesn't really have a budget and they potentially don't know what their values are, and we'll be like, well, we'll tell you. Yeah. And somebody who thinks that they're spending aligned with their values, and then us trying to work out if we agree and we pick, Okay, if you do have a budget when you send this in, say I have a budget or I don't have a budget, and we'll be fascinated. And there's no shame. It's just literally just an exercise, and we would love to hear from you as well. So, okay. So we can do, that's a really, really good idea. It's kind of well, you say these things, but what does the data say? What are you actually doing? Yeah. What does your budget tell us? And there's always going to be things that it's the Marie Kondo of cash flow, right? If it brings you joy, it's okay to keep it or spend on it. But there's always going to be things that you're well, that doesn't bring me joy, but I still need it. But I think if you dive a bit deeper, so years ago, somebody said, I hate hanging out washing, right? And somebody kind of said something, or I saw something, and it was how lucky are you that you have a washing machine and you have a family to wash for, and that they have clean clothes and all this kind of stuff. And so now when I'm hanging out the washing, I'm oh, how lucky am I? But it's true. It is, right? Yeah. So it's just a tongue in cheek, obviously, but that could be it. I don't want to pay my mortgage, or I don't want to pay my rent, but wow, thank God I've got a roof over my head, and I don't want to pay my electricity bill, but I enjoyed using my air conditioner, and that actually brought me a lot of joy, So it's on the surface, we might not see if it actually is bringing joy and adding value to our life, but generally it should be. Paying for fuel. I don't want to pay for fuel, but hey, it just got me out for dinner or to the beach to go for a walk. There's always bits that we can find in it that most of our expenses do align with things that bring us value. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's what I realized. And when I do this activity with people, I don't know if you find this, I often find that the thing that brings people joy and happiness don't cost that much. Like, it's not like, hey, I love going to the casino and just throwing money down. Like, most people I know don't ever say that. In fact, I've never seen that. But they do say things like, I love hanging out with my family, or spending time with my kids, or, watching the cricket, or whatever the case may be. Those things don't cost a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where you really need to like brainstorm as well. Like, I remember when I was going through my separation, and you just question everything about life and everything you've known. And I was moving to a new house, and I was literally making a list of all the fun things that I could do with the kids when they were going to be in this new neighborhood. And like, I didn't know what was happening with my money situation and all of that kind of thing. And I was like, okay, what are free things that we can do that kind of feel like stuff that they've liked before? And I was just like brainstorming all of this list, because it was really hard to think of stuff just on a whim. Like, it was like, well, you actually really need to dive into it. It's not easy. Like, it's not an easy thing just to kind of go, yep, I know what my values are. I know what's important to me. And I know how to achieve that. It's like, it takes a little bit of work.
Would you, if someone had like a blank canvas and you were sitting down with someone, like say you're sitting down with me, I'm your client, and you're like, okay, we're going to do a budget. And I'm like, I don't have one. You're like, okay, let's start with, what do you love doing? Blah, blah, blah. What happens if I said something like, I like to go fishing, right?
Yeah.
Would you have like literally on the budget template, or whatever, would you have fishing budget or fishing allowance, for example?
Yeah, I would. If that was something that was really important to you, let's put it in there. Like, and I guess it's if it costs money or not. So like, obviously I'm a spreadsheet person, so I'm writing it down. But if you're like sitting in a cafe and you're writing it on a napkin, whatever, like, you want to make sure that your expenses align. So if potentially that doesn't cost you any money each week, but what if you want to do a fishing trip once a year, or you want to do a boat hire, like a boat charter, or like whatever that is. So it might not be day to day that it costs money. You might be a cyclist that doesn't cost you any money, but it cost you $5,000 or whatever to get the bike. So you kind of want to look at, well, yeah, it might not be a day expense, but then how do I factor in so that when I still want to do things that relate to that? And that's the same as an overseas trip or a holiday. It's not that we're doing that every day, but we need to be working towards it every day so that when we're ready to do it, it's possible.
Yeah. A friend actually helped me through this. I always wanted to do Everest base camp, and my partner, she wanted to go to Europe, which is a pretty cool thing too, let's be honest. But she'd waited a lot longer. So it was kind of, let's prioritize that. But actually it was my life coach who said, well, what are the things that you enjoy about going at Everest? Like, what would that be? Well, it'd be probably like the thrill of the going up the hill, being in the fresh air, being outdoors. Mm-hmm. Well, that's $12,000 to get over there and blah, blah, blah. That's not even the full way up, right? So then, okay, what could you do that has fresh air, a challenge outdoors? Well, a marathon or something like that that's, still here in Australia, probably going to cost $60, same type of thing that I get from it, but low cost, which is great. Now you've alluded to spreadsheets. So just on this quickly, you obviously use that, but what would you say to someone who's not really a spreadsheet person?
So I think it's more important that you have a system that works for you than you try and do something that is like the benchmark of like perfection, right? Yeah. So there's lots of different ways that you can manage your money. And if you don't need, if life works for you without having a budget, great. I don't know many people that doesn't, but if you are like nailing your values aligned spending and being able to save and all of these kind of, or things are pretty simple, maybe you're living at home, maybe you don't actually need a budget, but as life changes, you need to be aware of when it's time for you to actually change that as well. So I didn't always have this hectic of a budget. Yeah. So you need to be aware of when are those key times that it needs to then evolve, or what you've been doing hasn't been working. So there's a few different really, your stock standard, your more common types of budgeting. So that's the $0 budget. So I didn't realize what this was. You didn't know what that was.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I follow this. So you explain it, because then I'll explain like how we've historically done it.
Yes. Okay. So what a $0 budget is it's when your income and your expenses net out to zero. So essentially every dollar that you earn, that has you have coming in, is assigned to a job. So whether that is it's paying bills, it's going to savings or whatever, but you're really accounting for everything. So that's $0 budget.
So for example, so this is similar to what we would do, but we would have some money for holiday, like long-term planning, something a little bit every month. We'd have some money for like what Barefoot Investor would call splurge.
Yes.
Like for us, it's a his and hers. Like I've got a bit, she's got a bit, you can do whatever you want. But then there was also an investing component, right? And so you get all of this, like you get your income on one side and then the expenses. But in the expenses, I'd include those things. Does that make sense? Like the investing and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So at the bottom, of course, it's zero, right?
So that's what you're doing.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So it might be that, say you've got a surplus of $100 or whatever, you're just then allocating it to, is it going to a savings goal? Am I investing it? Is it going here? Am I creating emergency fund? It's just making sure every dollar has, a job. And it doesn't need to be to the dollar, right? It's just like, I think people get pretty caught up in overthinking that, oh, well, if I have a budget, then I need to track every dollar and I need to do, like, you just find what works for you. So I have a budget that is very, very detailed, but I don't actually track my spending because I've got so used to living like this and my expenses being the same and it working that I don't need to track it anymore. But like when I first got a home loan, like I needed to track things and make sure, but I've got to the point where I don't now. And it might be the reverse, that you don't, and then you're seeing some bad patterns come up that are making things a bit more challenging. Maybe you need to go back to tracking it for a little while. So you just find what works. But a $0 budget is just making sure that you know where things are going and that all the money has a job, whether it's, you're investing in things. And then there's the one that's really common, which is those buckets, the percentages.
Yeah.
Which I'm not a fan of.
No, why are you not a fan of those?
But you are, aren't you?
Oh, no, it's not. I just think it's the simplest budget method.
Yes, but I think it's too simplified and people go, from my experience, people go on these percentages, the 50, 30, 20, and that doesn't work for people. So I think if you're going to use that percentage approach, that's absolutely fine, but you still need to know what your expenses are. You still need to have written them all down and worked out if 50% of all of those, like if all of those living ones, do they actually equal 50% of your pay? If they do, great, you can use it. But potentially it's 60, 20, 20. So you can use it, but you need to have still kind of done the $0 budget first and then just set that up as your approach to how you potentially automate things into your bank account. But I don't think as a blanket rule, you can this works. And that's, people think that's, if they're going to use that approach, it's that simple, and it's not.
So what about, so like, not to throw them under the bus, but Barefoot Investor book, super popular in Australia, right? I think there was like 20% left over for like future me type thing.
Yes.
Those types of rules, do you get around those types? Like, do you think that those are?
I think if that works, great, but you need to actually do a bit of an audit. You need to still write down all your expenses, and do you actually have 20% left over to be able to do that? If you do, great, go with that. But maybe for you, it's actually 25% or maybe it's only 10, but you need to work out what your percentages are. Because what is, for me, where I live, like, if you're living in central Sydney versus a regional town, it's going to be totally different of what you can be doing. So you can use the percentages once you know where your money's going. Okay,
so we audit the money, then we put them into categories, and then that's where we then figure it out.
Yeah.
I like it. Let me explain to you why I like those percentage ones, like the Barefoot Investor, or even just I don't really use the 50, 30, 20 one, but just for people that are unaware, the 50, 30, 20 is 50% on your needs. So it's like your mortgage, your transport, your groceries. Then there's 30% on your wants. So that might be like going out, holidays, that sort of stuff. Maybe a nice car might fall into that category if it's not essential, for example. And then the final one is 20%. It's like future me. And a lot of people think that's saving and investing. And a lot of people think that that's unachievable. So I think that's where people become unstuck. But I often say to them, if you can get to 20%, that's great. But if 11% is already going to super, so we've got 9% left over that you need to aspire to, you could probably push to that over the next year. And so what I mean by that is like I speak to a lot of single parents, right? And they're like, I don't have that type of money. It's like, don't sweat. If that's the gold standard, we can work to that.
Yes.
Start with 1%.
Yeah.
And then get up. But I think what happens is there's some people on the other end that are super good savers to the point where it's unhealthy as well. And for them, it's kind of coming back the other way. Like, oh, you know what? I do have a bit of money. I'm in a pretty stable job. I can spend a bit of money. Yeah, I can have fun.
Yes.
I don't have to save every dollar. So that's why I like it. But we don't follow any type of percentage. We do it like, it's more like what you're saying, like fixed dollar amount.
Yes.
Like what are we actually spending? But one thing I will say, I said I would tell you how I budget. It has evolved over time. So it used to be like 10 sub-accounts, stuff gets slotted into this thing, that thing, and then I'd check in with it every month and whatever. But I've realized now that I don't like necessarily doing that. Like I don't like, even though I'm a finance guy, I do not like to spend an excessive amount of time studying my bank statement. Far from it. Anyone will probably tell you that. So it's going to sound odd. We are sponsored by Pocketsmith on this show, but that's not why I'm saying I think Pockets, just the relationship allowed me to explore it. But as someone who's used Xero for the business for like forever, which is like budgeting for a business, basically is how I think about it. That's kind of like what Pocketsmith is. And so now I can like automatically categorize stuff, which for me is like a dream because I'm like, no more spreadsheets, no more nothing. I'm just like, it's done. It takes ages to set it up, by the way. I don't know if you use anything like that, but that's been a really good kind of thought experiment for my partner and I.
Yeah. And I think that's good to stress test as well, because you can have like we were talking about, the best financial plan, but sticking to it's different. Like your budget, the amount of people that say, but it works on paper, but it's not working in reality. And that's because they're either like they're overspending or they're being unrealistic with what they can achieve. They're setting the bar too high with potentially savings goals or debt reduction goals, and they're just not taking into account all of those extra things, like a small leak sinks a big ship or whatever they say.
Yeah.
So I think having apps like that, and potentially your bank is already doing that for you, categorizing it. So you need to have a bit of an idea, but I'm not big on like regularly tracking it. I think if there's a problem or you just want to reflect back, and maybe you do it for the year, or maybe you do it every month, 3 months, just find what works for you. But it might be a small amount of time that you need to change that behavior and focus on it a little bit more, but it doesn't mean you have to do it forever.
Yeah, what's it? I know there's like controversy around this, but they say it's like 6 weeks to form a new habit.
Yeah, I saw some data the other day, like 66 days is like forming a new habit. And I think if you're doing this with so if you're getting your budget sorted, so it's brand new year, 2025, you're getting your budget sorted, you're being more aware of your mindset, like you're now aware of value aligned spending. So your brain is constantly kind of thinking of these things. You've just set new goals. It's going to be a lot easier for you to kind of pick up and like check in on things and realize, maybe how often you are tapping. But you want to make sure that whichever budget you're going with, you then have the systems that will keep that in place. So the discipline's there when the motivation of the new year wears off.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're going to talk about debt. Like if you're doing a budget because you want to get out of debt, that's coming up in a future episode. It's only 2 away. So we will talk about that. So that keep an eye out for that. But I kind of agree with you. I think if you could do if you're new to this and you begin as like micro, like you're like, every day I'm going to check my bank to see what I spend money on. No judgment. Then after 2 weeks, it's going to be every week I check it to see what I spend money on. Then after 2 of those, then you go every month I'm going to check it. And then by then, I'm sailing off into the sunset. I think that's a good way. Like zoom in, get that kind of detox mentality. What is this? Why is it there? Can I clean that out? Then stretch it out, because that's a good way to do the audit, as you said,
Yeah. And I also talk to people about, so say they're overspending or they're feeling like their money's not going as far, like all of our expenses are going up. You don't need to overhaul everything. Potentially you just pick one area. So the most common thing that I will see people overspending in is they go, at food. Like they're going, we spend $200 a week on groceries. I'm like, yeah, you do in your big shop, but then you go into Coles and there's $30, $40. So that's usually where I see people's budget blow out. And it's because we're doing that unconscious tap. And like, I can't even remember what I did yesterday if I went to the shop or whatever. So one of the tools, and money coaching is all about just making sure people have the tools and thinking of different ways that might work for you. So one of those ways is having a piece of paper on the fridge. I've had clients that it's like magnet on the fridge and they have to write down every time they've spent money. And it might be $5 for a coffee, $200 for the shop, $40 here. And it's because they're going to the fridge all the time. You can write it down. Now, it's not saying that you can't spend that. It's not to say that's terrible. It's just to go, right, I'm going to do that for 4 weeks. And then I'm actually going to see, am I staying in my budget? Was it a one-off that I went over, or am I constantly spending over? That means we either need to cut it out or make the budget actually reflect it. Just be realistic with it. It's not about saying you can't have it. It's about making sure it works and you're not trying to work to a budget that works on paper but is not realistic in any sense.
Probably too much information, but the reason I started using MyFitnessPal so much, the app that tracks diets and that sort of stuff and fitness and weight goals, is because I was trying to figure out if I had like an intolerance to something. And so, they do like these long and drawn out, basically track your diet to see what's triggering your gut issues or whatever the case may be. And that's what forced me to do it. Is I was like, well, why is this happening? And then I started to realize, well, in the snack department, Owen, you tend to snack quite regularly. So if for whatever reason you're worried about, putting on weight or whatever, that's probably the area. And there was no judgment in that. And it wasn't like, oh, I need to stick to this calorie goal, or in money terms, I don't need to stick to this exact daily savings amount. It was more just being aware of it.
The awareness.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that made a big difference. So coming to the end of this, we're going to have resources in the show notes. You could use your banking app or something like that. I'll put a link to PocketSmith. We don't get anything from you signing up, but you would get a discount, as well as money coaching. Are those the kind of core tools that you would use in resources?
Yeah, absolutely. And just getting really clear on the style that's going to work for you. The most important thing is you need to find something that's going to be sustainable. There is absolutely no point of you going through this big overhaul and setting up all of this stuff if it's actually not going to be sustainable for you going forwards, if you're not going to stick to it. Finding whatever that is, if it's a banking app, if it's a napkin, if it's a piece of paper on your fridge.
Yeah, whatever works, and you can grow with it. Yeah, we do also have a course on Rask Education called Money Automation. It takes you through really simple examples of how to automate your money and your investing and all that sort of stuff. We take you through the things that shouldn't be automated, but also the things that you could very easily. And I find that that's amazing for me. All the bills, automated.
Yes.
You mentioned shopping earlier on. Do it online. Pay.
Yes.
Done.
Automation is your best friend. And I think also making sure, like I talk about systems a lot. So the systems that support a budget is different bank accounts that have different jobs. So maybe it's a bills account that that all of that money is allocated for bills that are coming up throughout the year. So you can't touch that money. If you do, it needs to be repaid. It's not just this thing's building up and the temptation, and so keeping things separate so that there's transparency on what its job is, can really help with you actually sticking to your budget.
Like it. Well, Gemma, this has been heaps of fun. If you do use a budgeting strategy, or you are one of these lucky people that want to, or brave people, that want to send us your budget, and we will do a bit of a values alignment live in the podcast, you can send that to surface@rask.com.au. There's also a link in your podcast player and YouTube description to get in contact with us via the Ask a Question link. Just hit the Australian Finance Podcast. Gemma, heaps of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. This podcast episode is proudly supported by Betashares, a leading provider of exchange-traded funds, or ETFs, here in Australia. In this rapid review of a Betashares ETF, I'm going to focus on something that's really exciting to a lot of forward-facing and future-facing investors, which is cybersecurity. The Betashares Global Cybersecurity ETF, or HACK, that's HACK, which is the ticker symbol, is one of Australia's most popular sector-based ETFs. And it's pretty easy to see why. The HACK ETFs gives you unique exposure to one important, emerging, and growing industry globally, which is cybersecurity. It's no secret that spending on cybersecurity is on the rise. And that's because the threats to corporates, to individuals, and to governments right around the world is also on the rise. So spending is naturally increasing as a result of having to combat threats to data, privacy, healthcare records, and so much more. You may remember that in 2024, we saw a massive cybersecurity event where, for example, airplanes were grounded as a result of a breakdown in a critical piece of cybersecurity infrastructure. It affected many Microsoft users around the world. This illustrated the critical importance of having really powerful cybersecurity, but it also highlighted the fact that cybersecurity systems are in place right around the world, even if we don't know they're being used. Ultimately, This ETF gives you exposure to one of the most important budgets that are available in business. And by that I mean, you're getting exposure to the Chief Information Officer or the CTO of a company. And their number one priority when it comes to their role in a business is do not let the system get hacked. We've seen massive cybersecurity events throughout the world. And so companies, CEOs, boards of directors are inherently really obsessed with spending money on cybersecurity and information systems because they need to make sure that their customers' data is secure. This ETF provides exposure to that sector, and around 32 companies are included inside this ETF with one purchase. Interestingly, here in Australia, we don't have that many major cybersecurity companies. So this ETF provides a window into global markets and into global companies that do indeed operate here in Australia, but happen to have their shares listed on an overseas stock exchange. Around 80% of this portfolio's investments are in the United States, where many of the world's leading technology companies and indeed cybersecurity companies are found. Everything from systems and internet circuitry and hardware is included inside this ETF. However, the predominant slither of the market that you are capturing is systems software. A good example of a company that is inside this ETF is CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike uses advanced AI technology to combat threats throughout its network intelligently. For example, if your device gets hacked, the CrowdStrike software will automatically detect what went wrong and apply the same safeguard to my computer, allowing the overall network to become more valuable and protect more users simultaneously. That's an example of the type of company you might find inside this ETF. Broadly, the Betashares Global Cybersecurity ETF could be used as a small allocation in a core portfolio or even as a satellite tactical play, tilting your portfolio towards some of the companies that are defending the world's technology infrastructure. I would highly encourage you to go and check out the PDS and the TMD, both of which are available on the Betashares website. And also, don't forget to speak to your financial advisor before making any decision to invest. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.